Bold way to meet a guy, I said. And the woman in my passenger seat went completely still. She had just pulled the door shut. Her seatbelt was halfway across her chest. She froze exactly like that, one hand gripping the buckle, head slowly turning toward me, and I watched the exact moment she understood she was in the wrong car. Her face went from exhausted to confused to mortified in about 3 seconds flat. "Oh my God," she said it quietly, like she was hoping the universe wouldn't notice if she kept her voice down. Then she was gone, door open, scrambling out, muttering something I couldn't hear over the rain hammering my roof. I watched her through the windshield as she stood on the curb, soaked immediately, staring at a charcoal gray sedan 2 spots ahead of mine. Same make, same model, different person's entire life inside it. She looked back at my car once. I did not look away fast enough. She turned red in the rain and walked very quickly toward the parking garage entrance without looking back again. I sat there for a moment longer than I needed to. Then I pulled out of the lot, and I told myself that was the funniest thing that had happened to me in months, and I drove home, and that was going to be the end of it. It was not the end of it. Her name was Mara Voss. I did not know that yet. What I knew was that she showed up in the same parking structure the next Tuesday, and she recognized me before I recognized her, which I could tell because she very deliberately changed direction and became suddenly very interested in a support pillar about 15 feet to my left. I should have let that be what it was. A stranger trying to quietly outlive an embarrassing moment. Normal human behavior. Instead, I said, "For what it's worth, you had the seatbelt halfway on." Very committed. She stopped walking, turned around slowly. Her expression was the specific face of someone deciding whether to be mortified or amused, and for about 2 full seconds I genuinely did not know which way it would go. It went amused. Barely, the corner of her mouth moved about 3 millimeters. "I thought it was my lift," she said. I figured. "You could have said something before I buckled in." I said something immediately. "You made a joke." I said something. She looked at me for another second. Then she shook her head in a way that was also somehow a laugh, turned around, and walked toward the elevator. I watched her go. 2nd floor, east stairwell exit. Probably worked in the building across the street with the glass lobby and the revolving door that always stuck on the left side. I did not follow her. That is important to establish now, because of what I am going to tell you later about who was actually following whom. Her name was Mara Voss, and she was a forensic accountant, and her office was in fact in the glass building across the street. And I know all of this because 3 weeks after the parking garage, she sat down next to me at the counter of the sandwich place on Clement Street, where I ate lunch approximately 4 days out of every 5. She sat down, looked at the menu board she clearly already knew, and said, without looking at me, "I'm not following you." I didn't say anything. You were about to. I was absolutely about to. We ate lunch. She ordered the same thing I ordered, which she pointed out was a coincidence, and I said nothing about. She told me she worked in forensic accounting. I told her I worked in property law. She made a face that meant she had opinions about property lawyers and was being polite enough not to say them, and I filed that away. She left first. She did not give me her name. She did not suggest we do this again. She was there the next day. And the day after that. On the 4th day, she told me her name without me asking, the way people tell you something they've been deciding whether to tell you, landing it sideways in the middle of a sentence about something else entirely. The problem with that building, Mara Voss, by the way, is that the assessed value doesn't account for the easement on the north side. "I know who you are," I said. She looked at me. "You're on the directory of the glass building." You looked me up. You sat next to me 4 days in a row without telling me your name. I was curious. She thought about that. Fair, she said. Then she picked up her sandwich and kept talking about easements, and I understood that was the closest thing to a green light I was going to get. And I paid attention. Her name was Mara Voss, and she was brilliant and careful and funny in a way that arrived quietly and then stayed with you. And there was something underneath all of it that I could not yet name. A kind of watchfulness, a habit of calculating exits, a way of going very still sometimes in the middle of a sentence like she'd heard something and needed a second to decide if it was real. I noticed it. I did not ask about it. Not yet. What I asked about 3 weeks in, on a Thursday over lunch, was the ex. Not directly. She brought him up herself, or rather, she brought up the apartment situation, which was the shape the ex had left in her life, the way a removed nail leaves a hole in a wall. She had been living in a 2-bedroom in the Richmond until 8 months ago. Then she wasn't. She was in a studio on Geary now, which was fine, she said, in the tone of someone describing a thing that was not fine. How long were you together? I asked. 4 years. A pause. We were also business partners, sort of. He consulted on some of my cases, referred clients. Another pause. It's complicated. I waited. She looked at her water glass. His name is Colin Draper. He does private wealth management. If you look him up, you'll find a very good website and several awards and not very much else. Should I look him up? I'm saying you could, if you wanted to understand the situation. She met my eyes once, quickly. I'm not sure I can explain it cleanly yet. You don't have to explain it cleanly. I might need to explain it eventually. She picked up her fork. Let's talk about something else. We talked about something else. But that night I looked up Colin Draper, and I found the very good website, and the several awards, and I found one other thing she hadn't mentioned. A civil suit filed 18 months ago by a former client, settled out of court, terms undisclosed. The client's name was removed from public filings. The law firm that had represented them had since dissolved. I looked at that for a while. Then I closed the tab and I told myself it was not my business, and I went to bed. And I was wrong again. 3 days later, Mara came into the sandwich place and she did not sit down. She stood next to the counter, coat still on, bag still over her shoulder, and she looked at me with the expression I would later learn to read as her pre-crisis face. The one that was very controlled and very quiet right up until it wasn't. He called my supervisor, she said. I put down my fork. Colin called the senior partner at my firm. He said I had been sending clients his way in exchange for referral fees and not disclosing the arrangement. She said it evenly. It's not true. But he has emails. Emails that look like they're from my account. Are they from your account? No. A pause. But they're very good. And my firm has a zero-tolerance disclosure policy, so they're doing a preliminary review, which means I'm on administrative leave starting Monday, and I cannot touch any of my active cases. I was already running the shape of it. He consulted on your cases. Yes, so he knows which clients, which files, which communication patterns. Yes, he had access to your work email at some point. For about 2 years, I gave him a forwarding address when we were working together. I changed the password when we split. He shouldn't have had access after that. She stopped. I don't know how he has access now. I thought about the civil suit. I thought about the dissolved law firm. I thought about a man who had 4 years to learn exactly how a forensic accountant worked, exactly how she communicated, exactly what her professional reputation was worth to her, and had apparently decided that reputation was the best lever he had. "Sit down," I said. She sat down. "Tell me everything from the beginning. Everything you remember about the email account, the forwarding address, when you changed the password, any devices he might still have access to." She told me. I listened. And underneath the listening, I understood something clearly for the first time. The watchfulness I'd noticed in her, the habit of calculating exits, the way she'd go still sometimes. She had been living inside a threat she hadn't named yet, and it had been real the whole time. We had about 4 days before the review findings would go to the equity partners. That was the clock. The first thing I did that afternoon was call a forensic specialist I had used in 3 separate cases involving fabricated communications. Her name was Deb Chow. She charged more than I would like to admit, and she was the best person alive at finding the fingerprints a spoofed email leaves when it is trying to look like something it isn't. I texted her the summary, and she called me back in 11 minutes. "Forward me the flagged emails," she said. "I need the full headers, not the preview, the actual source code. Tell her not to touch them on her work system." I called Mara. Mara pulled the emails through her personal device and sent the source headers to Deb. This was Tuesday evening. Wednesday morning, Deb called me. "The send timestamps are wrong," she said. "Not by much, 12 to 15 minutes off in each one, but consistently off in the same direction, which means they were generated on a machine running a slightly different system clock. Also, there's a routing signature in the header that traces back to a mail relay service that does bulk spoofing for, let's call them, reputation management firms." A pause. "Someone paid for a service to generate these. They're not handcrafted. They're a product. Can you document that in a form I can take to her firm? Give me 24 hours. Thursday, the review meeting with the senior partners was Monday at 9. We had 4 days, and we were now down to 3. The second thing I did Thursday morning was pull the original civil suit against Colin Draper. The client's name was sealed, but the claim was not. Misappropriation of client funds, fraudulent documentation, coerced settlement. I knew the attorney who had originally filed it, a woman named Susan Park who had since moved her practice to Oakland. I called her. She was quiet for a moment when I told her the name. "I can't talk about that case," she said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking whether your client would talk to me." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll pass along the message," she said. "It's their decision." Thursday evening, I met Mara at a coffee place on California Street. I told her what Deb had found. I watched her face do the thing it did when information reorganized itself into a shape she'd already suspected. "He did this to someone else," she said. It was not a question. There was a civil suit. "Settled. I'm trying to reach the former client." She was quiet. "He called my supervisor on Monday," she said slowly. "Review meeting is the following Monday. That's a very specific timeline. What happens to your active cases while you're on leave?" She looked at me. "They get reassigned." "To whom?" A longer pause now. "The firm uses 3 or 4 outside consultants when a case needs to move fast. Colin is one of them." She said the last part the way you say something you should have seen a long time ago. Quietly, without anger yet, because the anger was still becoming something large enough to contain. "He doesn't just want your reputation," I said. "He wants your case files." She put down her cup. "There's a case," she said. "I've been working it for 7 months. Regional asset manager, suspected of diverting trust funds across 4 family accounts. I'm 3 weeks from a completed report. If that goes to an outside consultant now, the report gets delayed. The file goes through new hands," and she stopped. "The asset manager is a client of Colin's. Private Wealth Management. There it was. The whole shape of it, finely visible. He had not done this because she left him. He had done this because in 7 months she was going to hand a completed forensic report to an attorney who was going to use it to initiate proceedings against a man who was, almost certainly, funneling some portion of those diverted funds somewhere Colin Draper could reach. She had not been a girlfriend to him. She had been a 7-month warning system. And when the warning went from theoretical to imminent, he had moved. "We need that report," I said. "I can't access it. I'm on leave. The firm's locked my system access. Do you have any of it locally? Personal backups? Anything you took home? I have my notes. Working documents. Not the full compiled file, but..." She stopped. "Enough to reconstruct the core findings. Maybe 60% of it. That's enough for a preliminary affidavit. I'm not an attorney. No, but I am." She looked at me for a moment. "This is a very large thing you're about to do for someone you met because she got in the wrong car. You had the seatbelt halfway on," I said. "You were committed." The corner of her mouth moved 3 millimeters. Friday morning I called Susan Park again. She had spoken to her former client, whose name I now knew was Catherine Belisle, and Catherine Belisle had agreed to a call. We spoke for 52 minutes. She told me about the fabricated documents, the coerced settlement, the way Colin had used forensic irregularities in a case she was consulting on to manufacture a conflict of interest that put her professional license at risk, until she agreed to sign the settlement and walk away. The same play, different stage. Catherine Belisle had signed a settlement with a non-disclosure attached. She could not testify. But she could provide, off the record, something I could use to find what she could not say publicly. The name of the mail relay service, which was the same one Deb had traced. The name of the reputation management firm that sold the package. And the name of the attorney who had drafted the coercion strategy, a man named Terrence Wills, who was no longer practicing in California. Terrence Wills was now in private consulting. In 2 hours of searching, I found his consulting LLC, his current address of record, and a digital paper trail connecting that LLC to 3 transactions from a holding company connected to Colin Draper's private wealth management firm. Colin had paid the man who designed his playbook. That payment was not privileged. It was a transaction record, and transaction records do not care about non-disclosure agreements. I called Deb. I sent her the chain. She spent 90 minutes and came back with a documented connection between the spoofing service used against Mara and the same service used against Catherine Belisle 18 months earlier. Same technical fingerprint. Same relay. Same product. Saturday. Review meeting was in 36 hours. Mara spent 12 hours on Saturday in my kitchen with her working documents and her notes, and I sat across from her and asked her questions and took everything she told me and built it into a declaration. Not a full forensic report. A declaration of preliminary findings, sworn, sufficient to flag the conflict of interest, sufficient to place a hold on reassignment of the file, sufficient to force her firm to consider that the review itself was the product of the same scheme the report was about to expose. We finished at 2 in the morning. She read the whole thing, all 17 pages, twice. She corrected 3 numbers. She asked me once if this was going to work. I told her I didn't know. I told her it was going to be harder to ignore than a termination was going to be easy. She nodded. She signed it. I notarized it. We sat there for a moment after, in the kitchen, papers spread across the table, both of us tired in the specific way that comes after a sustained stretch of very precise work. He thought I'd just take it, she said. Not with heat, factually, the way she stated most things. He knew what my license means to me. He calculated that I would sign whatever he needed me to sign and go away. He calculated wrong. He calculated wrong because of a parking garage. He calculated wrong because you didn't sign. She looked at me. I didn't sign because I had someone to call. I did not say anything. I didn't have someone to call before, she said. That's all I mean. Sunday, I filed the declaration with the firm's managing partner directly, bypassing the review committee, attaching Deb's technical report, the transaction chain connecting Draper to Wills, and a letter from Catherine Belisle's attorney confirming the existence of a prior substantially similar incident without disclosing the sealed terms. Monday morning, the review meeting was postponed pending outside counsel review. Monday afternoon, Colin Draper's consulting agreement with the firm was suspended pending the same review. 3 weeks later, a completed forensic report, rebuilt, recompiled, and signed by Mara Voss in her restored capacity, was delivered to the attorney managing the trust fund case. Proceedings were initiated. The asset manager's accounts were frozen. 2 of those accounts had wire transfer histories that ran through a holding company. One of the holding company's beneficiaries was Colin Draper. He had not been protecting a client. He had been protecting his own money. The civil complaint against him is a matter of public record now. I am not going to tell you how it ends because it has not ended yet, and I have learned in the last year to be accurate about things I don't yet know. What I know is this. She still orders the same thing I order, which she still calls a coincidence. She still goes very still sometimes in the middle of a sentence, slightly less often than before. Her studio on Geary is gone. The 2-bedroom in the Richmond is gone too, and we don't talk about that much, which is fine because we're in a different apartment now, with a kitchen table big enough to spread 17 pages across at 2 in the morning, and we have tested that. Last week she came downstairs while I was making coffee, looked at me across the kitchen, and said, "If you had not made that joke in the parking garage, you would have worked it out," I said. "I know I would have." A pause. "It would have taken longer. A lot longer." "Maybe yes." She took the coffee I handed her. Bold way to meet a guy. She said it flat, the way you say something back to someone after a year of deciding how you feel about it. "You had the seatbelt halfway on," I said. She looked at me over the rim of the mug. "I was committed," she said. "And if you have ever had the experience of watching someone decide not to go, of feeling the specific relief of being the place another person chose to stay, you already know exactly what that looked like, and you don't need me to describe it to you. But if you have someone like that in your life, someone who stayed when they didn't have to, someone who showed up in the same place 4 days in a row and called it a coincidence until they didn't anymore, I would really love to know how that happened for you. Leave it in the comments. The specific story, not the general feeling. The exact moment when you knew. And subscribe if you're still here. Because every story on this channel is exactly this. 2 people, 1 impossible situation, and the question of whether they're going to figure it out in time.